I'm Renu Joseph, and I am at the Department of Energy, a program manager for the modeling component that it's essentially called the Earth and Environmental Systems Modeling Program. So for this particular meeting, we thought we'd focus on something that could be of interest to a large group of people. Essentially, many of our meetings so far have focused more on the natural component of the Earth system. This meeting brings in the interactions with the human component also. And that is one of the aspects of this that we'll be focusing on in this meeting. And it is done to highlight this a DOE project called Interface it's that team that will be presenting today. And so at this meeting, we'll start it off with the program manager, Bob Valario, who is responsible for this component, who will provide a general introduction, followed by the PI of the new project, the Interface project, who will provide an overview of that particular project. And then we go into the details of the human component interactions with the natural system through the lead, Stephanie Waldorf. So with this, I invite Bob Valario to provide a brief intro and take it off from here.
Okay, thank you, Renu. And Hazel, I'll wait for you to pull up the slides. And
yes, I will get those pulled up. Let me see. Nope, that's not it. Can you see that?
perfect. Yeah, sure can. Well, thank you. And thanks, Renu. Renu and I are colleagues at the Department of Energy, along with a third colleague, Jujing Davis, and we manage the Earth and Environmental System Modeling Program. I focus on multi-sector dynamics, and I'm just going to give you a quick calibration point as context for the in-depth presentations that Joe Rowland from LANL and Stephanie, Los Alamos National Lab, and Stephanie Waldorf from Pacific Northwest National Lab will be moving into following mine. So next slide, please.
And Bob, could I ask, as you're going through, I think there are some folks who are a bit less familiar with the acronyms of the different labs and the different components. So if you could explain those as you go, that would be really helpful.
Sure. And hopefully I jumped back in and caught myself on LANL. I'm not sure if I did on PNNL, but it's Pacific Northwest National Laboratories. And both of those are DOE national laboratories. I forgot how many. We've got like 13 or 14 that we actually manage. Many of them I'm sure will be recognizable. So the goal of the multi-sector dynamics program within Earth and Environmental System Modeling is to explore the interactions and coevolutionary pathways of the human and natural systems, with a focus on, again, the natural, including the climate system, engineered, and socioeconomic systems and sectors. Next slide, please. And as we do this, remember, we're a basic research organization. There are other components within the department that have applied missions, including some that have operational programs within the Arctic. But for us, it's basic research. So for MSD, multi-sector dynamics, we're interested in looking at the forces and patterns that give rise to development and trans-regional, regional, sub-regional landscape evolutions. And the factors that give rise to and the characteristics that give rise to stabilities and instabilities across system sectors and scales. And then from the standpoint of foresight, we're not just interested in historically how this has unfolded and what the current environment looks like, but what might the future environment look like. And maybe the best way to frame this is that—
Did you see your salad?
Hello?
Yeah, what?
I haven't seen it, but I'm not hungry yet.
I'm sorry, is your— Okay, maybe somebody wasn't muted. And it's not just the current state or historical state, but where might we be? And if you think about it in the context of climate, it's non-stationary climate, the human systems are non-stationary as well. And they evolve not just due to climate stressors, but many other factors. And we're interested in how the whole system may co-evolve. Next slide, please. So there was a kind of an historical basis for this program. It tended to work at the I'd say continental to global scale initially, focused largely on things like mitigation and climate carbon management strategies, things like that. Some of you may be familiar with the term integrated assessment models. This program has its history in a lot of that, having supported the DOE work, but it has evolved significantly over the last decade. First looking at impacts, adaptation, vulnerabilities, and now looking at the entire coevolution of these complex systems. Next slide, please. And having done that, it is actually focused on global models initially, but then now it's had to move to much finer scales. And you're going to see a combination of that work in the interface activity that will be described momentarily. But suffice it to say that we have a predominant interest in different domains, including coastal dynamics, integrated water cycle, connected infrastructure, morphology, and resource development. And then we have an interest in various methodological areas. I'm not going to go through all of those now, but you can review the slides later. I've uploaded them and you get a picture of some of the things, but we're very in tune with open science and creating a community of practice. And I would encourage you to click that small link in the first line. And also in scenario development and complex storylines that could be used not only for research, but for various communities. Next slide, please. So I'm going to wrap up now just by saying that, we've done a tremendous amount of global work, and that's not represented here, but I wanted you to know that as part of both focused and then collaborative efforts with Renew and my other colleague and others within, including other agencies, we've engaged in a multitude of study areas within the continental United States. And you see many of the projects and many of the study areas or geographies that correspond to those. But next slide, please. We're really excited to bring in this whole interface project and explore and bring in the human dimensions, at least from the DOE standpoint, into our modeling of Arctic systems, and in this case, the North Slope of Alaska, but Alaska writ large. And it's a wonderful opportunity. It's got very unique challenges, unique stressors, unique infrastructures, peoples, communities. Pretty exciting opportunity, and I think this is a great transition to turn this over to Joel.
Thanks, Bob. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the project as a whole before Stephanie takes over to talk about our multi-sector dynamics. So thank you everyone for calling in today. And we actually have a nice attendance from the project itself. We have a large group and they are actively involved in it. And so to give you going into the introductions, the Interface project stands for Interdisciplinary Research.
Joel?
Yep.
Can you just make it full screen mode?
Sure. Sorry, I went out of full screen. There we go. Is that better?
Yes.
Great. Sorry. So the Interface project is a project. The science is based around what we describe as Bob put forward, sort of a systems approach, where we recognize to understand the coasts broadly writ large involves intersection between land and ocean, and also interactions between natural system and humans. And so on the right, we have a graphic which really is focused around the fact that within a modeling framework, and this is a picture of a mesh from the E3SM Earth System model grid, that the Arctic is a unique region within the globe, but it is connected globally. And that is true both for the environmental systems and the human systems. And then the pictures around it capture a range of aspects of the coastal science, or the science we're involving in Interface. And that involves science that addresses the coastal processes, right at the coast, the ocean dynamics, the sea ice dynamics, upstream watersheds, and the human activities both locally and globally. And the other key component, which we really is exciting about the Interface project and makes it somewhat unique within the MSD framework, is that it is focused on the Arctic, and the Arctic has some very unique aspects about it that make it a region that is unique and compared to other coastal regions. The sea ice, predominantly permafrost, and the sensitivity to global drivers and feedbacks. And so to give you an overview in terms of the modeling, our project, as I'll explain in a minute, is composed of 4 different DOE program research areas, modeling and data, but we have a broad range of components. And within the watershed and ocean modeling, these are representative of focuses where we're building out modeling capability or employing modeling capability to understand new dynamics in the coupled coastal system. And they range from using new multi-resolution focus in the global climate model to improving landfast and other sea ice dynamics to working on new model improvements such as waves and oceans. And as Stephanie will talk to you about in a lot of detail, bringing in new capabilities within the global economic models to interface with the global climate model changes. We also have improvements in the biogeochemistry, the mixing in the ocean, and watershed scale modeling. And so these are all broad components of modeling within the Interface project. And today we'll really be focusing on the intersections of these developments with the human and economic systems. And so the overall Interface project has specifically focused areas, but broadly the goal goes across these cross-cutting science themes, and we categorize them into sort of 3 large umbrellas. One is uncertainty in terms of predictability of Earth system models, really beginning to understand how much uncertainty is coming from the models versus the environment. And this is a plot showing the CSM large model ensemble of sea ice projections and just the broad range of projections coming from the model itself. And not only are we looking to address that through ensemble simulations, but also using a hierarchy of models. So understanding how fidelity and different process representations affect the confidence and predictability we have in models. The second panel is really looking at the seasonality. And this is a graphic that I like a lot because it highlights a unique aspect about the Arctic, which is there are dynamics which have a very strong seasonal temporal component. Everything from sea ice in the top panel to maritime traffic, which is closely linked to sea ice, and to permafrost thaw, coastal erosion, and freshwater discharge. And these are shifting across the Arctic and across space. And how they interact is what we're really interested in, is how a change in one component of the seasonality may impact or feed back on other components. And finally, we have a broad characteristic of typologies. And this is really where we are trying to use knowledge of place space, different characteristics in the Arctic, and understand what that tells us about the Arctic writ large and how the unique aspects of combinations of things like open water periods and river discharge will affect unique areas combined with oil and gas and resource development. So really understanding the intersection of the unique aspects with commonality across the system. And so to give you an idea of the project structure, we are funded by the DOE Earth Environmental System Science Division. And within that program, we are funded through the Earth System Modeling programs, the Model Analysis, Regional and Global Model Analysis, which is run by Renew, the Earth System Model Development Program run by Jujing Davis, the Multisector Dynamics side run by Bob Valerio, and the Data Management side, which is run by Jay Nilo. And that kind of covers across the entire range of the project. There are 4 national laboratories participating in it: Los Alamos, Oak Ridge, Pacific Northwest National Lab, and Sandia National Lab, and university partnership with University of Alaska Fairbanks and soon NCAR assisting us. And as the graphic on the left shows, which came out of our proposal, we tried to integrate not only the program areas, which are the inner RGMA, ESMD, with our science themes. And we had 4 common Earth science themes: sea ice and ocean dynamics, permafrost hydrology, coastal change, and marine biogeochemistry, linked with integrated multi-sector dynamics, looking at transportation, resource development, communities, and marine ecology. And how those linkages build out is what we've been really building on. Is that our goal was really to build the integrated science by not stovepiping within these program areas, but really cut across it. And I have 2 quick slides to sort of show what that means practically. And on the far right, we have the cross-cutting questions, which are the overarching results that we hope that the science will build towards. But within each box, we have the various program areas. And listed in these are short tags for different tasks that we have. And to give you an example, if you start in the bottom left, we have the data management program, which is being largely run out of University of Alaska Fairbanks. In addition to a data archive, we've been really looking at archiving and curating really specific data sets which support the interface science. And those include sea ice data sets and river data sets. And those feed into the RGMA work, which is really focused on doing analysis of the models, analysis of observational data, finding out historical trends, needs for new model development, and using a hierarchy of models to look at process improvements within the Earth system model framework, and really building out benchmarking capabilities. Those feed over and interact with the larger Earth system model development program through the E3SM project, for everything from watershed modeling to ocean stratification. And all those feed back within the multi-sector dynamics at different scales. And so Stephanie will give a much broader description of that, but how local light touch and north case scenarios touch in with larger scale shipping models, which feed back to things like admissions, which will feed back to ESMD. And this is on the transportation side. If you look at sort of resource development, we have slightly different connections within it, but the same sort of framework. In the resource development, really, here we're focused at both natural fossil resource development and food resources related to marine biogeochemistry and primary productivity. And so our goal in the project is really to combine the program efforts and develop a result which is bigger than any single program effort, but leads to more of an integrated science and really communication across traditional boundaries of Earth system modelers and economic modelers, and also model analysis. And it's been a big boon to us in terms of the science we're doing, in that early conversations and early integration has led to much more informed science, and has actually helped develop our modeling plan and really caused a lot of cross-project integration. And so before I turn it over to Stephanie, I'll go to our last slide, which is that part of engaging with IARPIC, which is great, is it's a great opportunity to engage with other researchers and build out collaborations. And so we've had conversations with a large number of people that's much broader than the slide, but we're highlighting a lot of the active collaborations we have going forward on interface science. And this goes everything from data exchange from projects providing us to support our modeling, to our modeling to help inform other projects, to coordinated research efforts where the scope of our projects are synergistic and complementary. And so without taking up any more time, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie, and she's going to dive into a lot more detail about the human dimensions and multi-sector dynamics. Thank you very much.
Okay, can you guys see my screen first, and I will put it on full screen?
Yes, it looks good.
Okay, great. So I'm Stephanie Waldoff. I'm the co-PI for the multi-sector dynamics component of Interface, but I want to note that I am presenting on behalf of the full MSD team, which includes researchers from University of Alaska Fairbanks and colleagues here at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. The goal of the MSD research within Interface is to understand the interactions between natural and societal changes taking place in the Arctic around human settlements, global demand for natural resources and shipping, and the resulting feedbacks into the natural Arctic system. We explore these dynamics through analyses at local, pan-Arctic, and global spatial scales. More specifically, we're seeking to inform our knowledge on the coevolution of these systems, including identifying key drivers and critical thresholds and the feedbacks and interactions between the global economy and local communities. Because the MSD work is just one component of the larger Interface project, as Joel mentioned, we've been able to work closely not only with each other, but also with the physical system modelers, enabling the development of models to benefit multiple research tasks. The MSD research and Interface will approach the scientific challenges and the goals through linkages between Arctic environmental and societal changes, as I mentioned, across multiple spatial and temporal scales and multiple economic sectors. the work is focused on understanding these interactions and feedbacks across these scales and the drivers at both human and Earth systems. The particular interests, as Joel's already mentioned, we've got some specific areas on Arctic shipping, Arctic fossil resource production, housing and mobility, marine subsistence and livelihood, and human health, though we're not going to be able to cover all of these in phase 1 of the project. Because the linkages across all these systems are multiple and complex, I'm going to first just walk through some of the connections between the research components over the particular research area on Arctic shipping and the resulting implications for human systems. And then I'll turn to some of the results from our project. So first, multiple drivers will influence the future evolution of Arctic shipping. These include physical conditions, such as sea ice thickness and extent, the relative cost of transporting the fuel, and the demand for shipping. The shipping and associated drivers will have implications for other systems as well. There'll be particulate matter emissions from shipping and greenhouse gas and air pollutant emissions from oil and gas extraction. The changes in sea ice, shipping, fossil production, and emissions are all also going to have implications for local communities' well-being, including local revenues and jobs, mobility, access to whaling grounds, human health, and food security. So the first thing we need to know to understand the potential evolution of Arctic shipping are the sea ice conditions in the shipping channels, looking at things like sea ice thickness, extent, and ridging. So we need to know, are the lanes open? If so, at what times of year? What types of vessels will be needed to traverse them? But current ESMs cannot fully resolve these routes, particularly through the Canadian archipelago. In the panel on the far left, we can see the potential shipping lanes through the Arctic defined by the Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment, but neither CESM or E3SM version 1, and actually really no other CMIP class model, can fully resolve these lanes. So when people are looking at sea ice changes through these channels, they need to estimate them through alternate methods, not directly from the outputs from the climate models. So given that we have this primary research task within MSD to study the evolution of Arctic shipping, the ESMD team worked very closely with the MSD shipping team to ensure that the unstructured mesh that they developed for E3SM version 2 is able to fully resolve these shipping lanes.
Oh, Stephanie, you got muted somehow.
Okay, I'm back. All right, so a second, and I also skipped ahead on slides then. Let's go back. Okay, so a second driver of Arctic shipping is understanding what the relative costs are of transporting goods through the Arctic compared to other routes. So thinking first just of shipping, we have two primary routes we can think of, the Northern Sea Route or the Suez Canal. And for many destinations, the Northern Sea Route would be a shorter distance than using the Suez Canal route, and may, under ideal conditions, be faster as well, but it may not be less expensive given the potential need for icebreakers or more expensive ships and more dangerous conditions. Further, the speed at which ships can travel through the Arctic routes will vary with conditions beyond just sea ice, including storms, and also regulations restricting the use of certain routes during native whaling grounds. So it may limit some of the times that these routes are open. So understanding whether the shorter route is actually faster and cheaper requires an analysis that includes all of these factors. Further, ships aren't the only method of transporting oil and natural gas. The demand for shipping is also going to depend on the relative cost of transporting oil and gas through pipelines. But at the same time that shipping channels and sea ice conditions are being impacted by climate change, the The maintenance costs of pipelines are also going to be impacted by climate change through permafrost thaw, which will affect the stability of oil and gas pipelines, and then the maintenance cost. In addition, the natural gas to be transported via ship, it has to be liquefied, adding another cost to transporting natural gas via ship as opposed to pipeline. So all of these things need to be looked at in tandem in order to really understand what the likelihood of shipping, transporting natural gas and oil via ship. And then a third driver is actually the demand for shipping. Here we're looking at the potential changes for demand to Arctic oil and natural gas production. We want to understand under what conditions we'll see increases in production or decreases. The conditions that we're looking at include global socioeconomic drivers, such as changing population, economic growth, and trade. Also national or local policies regarding offshore oil production. To project the national and global drivers of demand, we're using the Global Change Analysis Model, which is a fully integrated model of land, energy, water, climate, and socioeconomic systems. But sea ice conditions will also impact the technological changes of offshore oil extraction. So as sea ice thickness decreases, it becomes possible to use less expensive technologies, making Arctic offshore production more competitive with other areas. Both shipping and fossil extraction will produce emissions with the potential to feed back into natural systems, for instance, through changes in ice albedo due to particulate matter deposition. But the specific emissions and amounts will depend on the type of ship, speed, and route, all of which we'll be working on through the other tasks just mentioned. And finally, all of these factors will impact local communities. To understand how, we're studying the components of the socio-ecological system in the North Slope Borough. This work involves articulating and understanding the connections between the drivers, activities, pressures, state changes, impacts, and measures that will influence the system. Shipping, resource extraction, and commodity prices will influence the local system, and the system will also be influenced by the same physical system and global drivers that impact shipping and fossil production. So, as you can see, these are really complex, multifaceted relationships, which is why I kind of wanted to walk through first how all of these factors or all of these research areas are connected. And now I'll go through and give some high-level results from our work so far. So these streams of work are going on in parallel, but we're closely coordinating to allow us to bring this all together in the future. So first, as I mentioned earlier, E3SM version 2 was designed with an unstructured mesh that fully resolves the shipping lanes identified by the Arctic Marine Shipping Assessment. The sea ice results have good agreement with observational data. So soon we'll be able to incorporate these results into the shipping and fossil extraction research. For our pan-Arctic and global analysis, we're using, as I mentioned, the Global Change Analysis Model, GCAM. And as I said, it's fully integrated across energy, water, land, climate, and socioeconomic systems. It has a flexible spatial and temporal scale, but it's generally run in 5-year increments. And our standard version of the model has 32 energy economic regions, 384 land regions, 235 water basins, and projects global average temperature change with a simple climate model Hector. It's a market equilibrium model in which all markets are solved in every period. There's no perfect foresight into the future. Our economic actors are all reacting to conditions in the present period. But we've done some additional development for GCAM and Interface. Specifically, we've separated out all the Arctic countries and have separated offshore oil production for the 18 USGS offshore hydrocarbon basins. The first development allows us to analyze the GDP feedbacks from changes in oil and gas production in each country. And the second development is important because sea ice conditions don't change uniformly across the Arctic. So the finer resolution of 25 basins, which reflects the combinations of the 5 Arctic countries and 18 geological basins, allows us to model the different changes in technology options due to local sea ice conditions in each basin. So we've completed our global scenario design and initial implementation in GCAM. The current scenarios are described by both human and physical system drivers, the reference with rapid economic growth and high dependence on fossil fuels. And we're also going to be exploring low carbon futures, which have implications for demand for fossil fuels. On the Earth system side, we're exploring 4 potential futures: a counterfactual with no warming, a high warming scenario, RCP 8.5, and 2 more limited warming scenarios, RCPs 4.5 and 2.6. We use the monthly average sea ice conditions to inform when different extraction technologies will become available in different basins. And the figure on this slide shows the 9 basins in Russia, just as an example, under one ensemble member. And then looking at the same Russian basins and noting that we've done this for all 25 basins, we've translated those monthly sea ice conditions into annual extraction costs that are based on those local changes in ice conditions. And I want to note that the costs that we're looking at here only include the different technology options available due to sea ice thickness. There's additional costs that may be related to the harsh conditions in the Arctic that are not included here. And then we've put those into GCAM to look at how those changes in costs will affect Arctic offshore oil production. We found that in the futures with high fossil fuel dependency, Russia begins Arctic offshore oil production early in the century under all scenarios, but other Arctic countries begin production only in the 2 warmer futures. By 2100, Russia is projected to exploit approximately half of its potential under RCP 8.5, while the US and Norway exploit approximately 25% of their potential, and Canada and Greenland are expected to use less than 5% of their potential. On the permafrost and pipeline side, we analyzed multiple subsidence thresholds at which pipelines would need to be replaced and a range of cost estimates for the replacement. The figure here just shows the central estimates, and we can see that at lower thresholds, the increased cost of pipeline maintenance could exceed revenues for natural gas by 2030. These estimates are likely to be lower bounds as well, because the impacts of permafrost degradation on other infrastructure, including gathering lines, compressor stations, pumping stations, are not included here. So there's a real potential for existing pipeline infrastructure in Arctic permafrost regions to become not economically viable in the coming decades. In the North Slope Borough analysis, we've completed a comprehensive assessment of the socio-ecological system, defining the North Slope Borough system as an oil and gas SES and comparing with other Arctic oil and gas socio-ecological systems. Our UAF team has summarized different scenario approaches to understand the potential futures for the North Slope SES. And the work has focused on identifying the web of relationships that can impact environmental and societal transformations and synthesize these within the context of existing climate model scenarios and previously conducted participatory scenarios that were developed with stakeholder interactions. And where are we heading with this research? The goal is to have all of these streams of research coming together in the next year. We'll be further developing the local scenarios of change in the North Slope, using environmental model outputs to explore the transformative local scale change and including more complex societal factors. We're also going to be extending these scenarios to explore the implications of projected changes in shipping, fossil production, and revenues from the global analysis. And we have some further development that we'll be incorporating into GCAM that's going to enable us to better reflect the cost of pipeline gas and LNG in the Arctic, and also incorporate the cost of changes for pipeline gas due to the permafrost degradation impacts on pipelines. Soon we'll also be analyzing the future demand for and the routing of Arctic shipping due to changes in oil and gas production and sea ice conditions. And when all of those components are complete, we'll be generating a set of gridded emissions projections consistent with those shipping and oil and gas production scenarios. And finally, I wanted to mention that there's some other components of the MSD work that I haven't mentioned and are ongoing. There's an integrating task on the implications of changing socioeconomic and physical systems on food security in the North Slope Borough. And we're also beginning a task on developing typologies of human mobility across the Arctic. That work will be identifying modes of mobility, such as ice roads in different areas, and what factors will affect the future viability of those modes of transport. And thank you all very much for attending. We have representatives from all parts of the MSD research team here today, and we welcome your questions.
Thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Joel. It's quite a bit of work and ideas that you've discussed. I'd like to open up the floor for questions. Please feel free to either raise your hand and then ask the question. And if there's someone on the phone who wants to ask a question, which I don't see anybody on, feel free. So let's first open the floor to people on the phone if there are any. Okay. Hearing none, I'd like to invite Vladimir to ask his question.
Oh, hi, Stephanie. Can you go back and show your slide with a big icebreaker and a small boat?
1 second. Let's share my screen again. Go backwards.
So the reason why I'm asking you to show this, okay, so I'll just start talking.
Okay.
The reason why I'm asking you to show this slide is because I was on the icebreaker.
Which, oh really? Which
in the picture.
Wait, which picture are we in?
That's a big icebreaker and a small boat behind it.
Oh, right here? Is that?
No, not that one. Or maybe Joel.
Joel must have shown it. Okay, but I do have his slides here too. I was going to say, I don't think I have that picture.
Well, okay, it doesn't matter. Oh yeah, there. There. Oh, no, in the corner.
Okay.
There.
Yeah, there. Okay, I see
so
it.
The big boat is a Russian icebreaker, Kapitan Dranitsyn, and a smaller boat behind is a French yacht Tara, which repeated Treaty of Nonsense drift in 2006. And I was on the big icebreaker. We actually were deploying Tara for the drift. And the fun fact about this picture is that Tara got arrested by Russian border authorities for more than a week because they didn't fill out some paperwork or they violated some regulations. So we had to wait for them for 2-3 days before they were released from the customs in Tixi. So my whole point about this slide is that if we are talking about shipping along the Northern Sea route, we definitely need a parameterization for Putin in your model. I said that before during our kickoff meeting, and I will say it again. So there's many more political factors that are impacting.
I would group that into my broad category of local regulations and policies regarding Arctic shipping. Does it fall into that category?
Yeah, more or less. But yeah, just wanted to stress that there's more to this
Yeah.
story
Yeah.
as far as regulations are concerned.
I think it's an important broader point as well. And I think that's part of what I was trying to capture just when we're, thinking about just, one simple thing of Arctic shipping. It has interactions with so many different aspects of the system that we wouldn't be getting kind of the correct answer if we're only looking at changes in sea ice conditions, or if we're only looking at changes in demand. There's a lot of things that are happening simultaneously, and to really understand how things might evolve, we need to look at all of them.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually, Stephanie, just to add to that, that's one of the reasons why in our initial analysis, we're focusing on the fossil resource trade, because it's mostly fossil resources being extracted from Russia going to high value markets in East Asia, for which Putin actually has an incentive to get it out. So in terms of the actual modeling there, the costs of the icebreaker is a huge cost. And as the months that you need icebreaker escort is being determined by the sea ice thickness. So that's a cost we can nail down and get a handle on. And in future, that could go away as a sea ice or as the regulations regarding that change. And that was one of the reasons why we're not going to tackle commercial shipping at the moment, partly because we don't model the economic drivers of the range of commercial products that could be shipped. At the moment, the uncertainty of when they can get through is such that there's not a big incentive for commercials. We're focusing on the fossil and the mineral resources that for which going over the northern sea route, even if it's slower, it's more a question of fuel savings. So that's kind of the perspective that we're using at the moment. But that's a good point, Alexa.
Thanks, Siva, for explaining that in more detail. Hazel, you do have your hand up.
Yeah, I have a question if no one else has their hand up, so I'll ask my question. I was curious if there's a portion of the model that's looking at energy development other than oil and gas, if there's, and do you see a potential for other kinds of energy development in the Arctic, and what would that look like? And then a second sort of unrelated question, I was curious if you were working with anyone from the oil and gas industry or from the shipping industry to sort of see if your model outputs are lining up with their forecasting.
So those are really good questions, and I realized I didn't do a great job explaining that. So yes, GCAM absolutely has a full range of energy technologies and sources. I don't think we're modeling anything like Arctic offshore wind at the moment, but they're not even actually sure like what the potential is up there. But we do have, any energy technology you could imagine in the model. So it's not just, we're focusing on oil and gas here because that's what would be shipped through the Arctic. And the second part of the question, are we working with people from industry? I think Nina is on, although I think maybe this work was done before you joined the project, Nina, but there were several conversations that were had with executives about the costs of pipeline infrastructure maintenance. Could you weigh in on that at all, Nina? You're muted, I think.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, we met with some cost regulators who gave us insights about how much it costs to replace pipelines. And we also met with engineers who had experience doing pipeline engineering in Russia and in Alaska. And they also had observations that lined up with our research, like seeing damage from permafrost thaw already to pipelines.
Thank you. And then on the shipping side, we've reached out to some people. We haven't actually gotten to the point of getting our own projections yet. So we don't actually have a point to compare to yet, but we have reached out to several other teams in this area. I'll just go ahead and Richard and then Hayo.
I just wanted to follow up on Hazel's question about model validation and model confidence. I guess I was wondering if you had some general comments about that, but then in particular about the the resource development aspects. I guess you've indicated that you've been reaching out to these various groups. How are their data used then for validation?
Well, we haven't actually, on the shipping side, we haven't gotten to actual projections yet. So there's nothing that we're validating right now. And in terms of validation and something that like, in the human systems, kind of forward looking, it's so much is dependent on things that can't be modeled, things like, COVID, that, our model would never have picked something like that up ahead of time. We're just, no model would, right? So when a lot of what we do is evaluation, looking kind of at the past when we're calibrating different parts of our model. And yes, when we get to the shipping side, we'll definitely be doing, comparisons there. But we just haven't gotten there yet.
Yeah, just to add to that, we have from the transportation geography literature, there's been a lot of analysis of when the Arctic shipping routes are going to open. Actually, we're using that literature. We're following closely that literature, and the value added that we're bringing is that we're using CMIP6, sea ice thickness results. We're taking into account the permafrost, the damage to pipeline infrastructure for conveyance due to permafrost thaw. And so we'll be able to, once those results are out, to be able to have, a direct comparison to what, and actually review our feedback in terms of what the literature is saying. Other groups that have tried to do this type of analysis, again, they haven't used the CMIP6 results that we're using. And the fact that in GCAM, we're actually making our supply curves for offshore oil endogenous to the sea ice thickness. And so basically we're shifting those supply curves to the right as sea ice thickness declines. That'll actually be something that will be value added that we don't see elsewhere in the literature, but for which we as we would rightly also want to get feedback and a sense of whether the scenarios that we're looking at conform to what other people are seeing as well.
Hiya.
Yeah, thanks. That was a great overview, Stephanie. I had a quick comment and a question. The comment is, I think it's really important to look at pipeline viability from an infrastructure integrity and economics perspective. I don't know, some of you may have seen this. I would argue that your analysis may even be underestimating the threat to infrastructure, because you see now with the Alaska pipeline that even under conditions where the active layer depth may not be in a realm where you have problems, in areas where you have slopes, you start to see solifluction and movement of the pipeline supports. That's currently underway at one of the sites just 50, 60 miles north of Fairbanks, where then industry has to go in and put in a larger number of heat sinks to help stabilize the permafrost. They may even have to do deeper drilling. So those types of effects may not even be accounted for in the analysis that you've done. And that's not to discredit, but just to say that it may probably be conservative. The question I had was, can you say anything about how your socioeconomic modeling and the resource modeling may help kind of underpin or even enhance and put more nuance on estimates of vessel traffic through Bering Strait? Because that's of course a big concern for people in the region. You've got currently, I forget what it is, like on the other order of a couple of dozen ice-breaking LNG tankers that are projected to be in operation by 2024. That number is supposed to go up to something like 60 or 70 by 2030. But those numbers may not reflect some of the global demand. So I was wondering whether there's anything you can say about that, because that might be interesting to communicate to others from the Bering Straits region as well. Thanks.
I think one thing we will definitely be able to explore is how different evolutions of the global socioeconomic system will impact just the demand overall for oil through the Arctic. And I mean, if we are looking at lower carbon futures, how much demand we have for that oil will be very dependent on what kinds of measures are put in place to get us to that lower carbon future. Is it going to be a world where we're much more dependent on carbon capture and sequestration, so we're still using those fuels, or is it a world where we're very heavily dependent on renewables? Is it some mixture of that? So, I think that in, maybe not, I don't know that our analysis will be able to weigh in very heavily on the very short term. I think there's other models that could do a lot better job with that probably, in the next 5 to 10 years. But I think that, looking at all of these factors simultaneously as we go out past 2030 to, the 2040, 2050 range, and we're looking at how climate conditions and socioeconomic conditions are changing at the same time to affect just the overall need, the viability, but also the need for that transport. I think that's where we could probably help inform the most. Don't know if anybody else from the team wants to add to that.
No, I agree, Stephanie. And we have Stephanie showed the oil results first, partly because we're trying to there's ongoing work right now to differentiate within our modeling the liquefied natural gas and the piped natural gas within GCAM. So we're trying to wait for that improvement to come so that we can be able to address that issue of how natural gas gets moved in a better way. So that's why she didn't show the results for natural gas at this moment.
So, Stephanie, I have a more basic question. In a case like this, where there are so many multiple competing factors that determine what the future evolution of the state is, how many scenarios, or I'm fairly certain you take into account the different possible scenarios for, say, the changes in pipeline due to permafrost or the changes in shipping. So how many scenarios would you roughly have to go through to potentially talk about transportation affecting a particular region? I know it's a very general question, but I'm just trying to wrap my head around the complexity of the problems and trying to get a clearer answer.
No, it's an excellent question, Renu. So I think that, to some extent, the scenarios may be, will be on the climate side, will be what we, end up getting from E3SM version 2. And, we sort of have a mixture of scenarios going on here that I didn't delve too deeply into that we're going to be trying to bring all together. We have obviously the climate scenarios and the GCAM scenarios. There's going to be an additional set of scenarios on the shipping side. Each of these are going to have, different sensitivities, and we're going to be able to build off of each other, but we're also needing to link up with the scenario analysis that's done at the local scale on for the North Slope Borough, which has a different set of factors. And so I think I don't quite know how to answer that question yet. I think the number of scenarios is going to not be large by exascale computing levels. We're not going to be doing hundreds of thousands of scenarios, but it's going to be large enough, I think, in terms of kind of communicating the range of results. And there kind of what factors, it would probably be driven by what factors are important for the different outcomes that we're looking at. I don't know if that answers a little bit, maybe, your question.
It gives a general feel for how you'd be proceeding, so.
It depends, right? That's always a good answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Are there any more questions? If not, Richard, do you want to, would you be able to indicate when the next MST meeting is? And otherwise, we can point people to the website for the next meeting that we'll be having.
Well, the next meeting is 1 week from today on the 29th, right? I don't recall the specific time. Let me just take a look quickly here at the website. 1 to 2 Eastern time. And it will be on models for terrestrial ecosystems and wildfire research. And for August, we have 2 meetings in the planning. One is going to be on observing system simulation experiments. And the other one will be a joint meeting with the sea level change team on the modeling of glacier calving.
So thanks, everyone. And thanks to all the speakers and all the members from the different collaboration teams who've joined us today. And looking forward to your interest and participation in the upcoming meetings. We are always welcoming of new ideas that you want to discuss at the meeting. Hazel, did you have your hand up?
No, I was just applauding the speakers, and thanks so much for joining today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you very much to